Tom Threepersons was a local legend in El Paso for not only his reputation as a lawman, but all of the gunfights that he survived through. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to cover the last great gunfighter of the American West. A man that history knows as Tom Threepersons, but who really has no real name. The reason for this is rather complicated. Tom Threepersons was born in Veneta, Oklahoma in 1889 on the Cherokee Indian Nation. At that time, the federal government had started something called the Dawes Rolls, which is a way to keep track of Cherokee family names and their lineage. Threepersons is not, in fact, a Cherokee name, and if you typed it in to any sort of Google search, you wouldn't find Tom Threepersons. You might find a person named also Tom Threepersons, where the three and the persons are separate, who was actually a champion rodeo cowboy in the same period of time, which leads to all of this confusion. But on with the story. The gunfighter known as Tom Threepersons moved early in his life to the Alberta and Montana border. At some point, he claimed that he was taken to the Carlisle, Pennsylvania School for Native Americans, though no person exists under that name either there. Of course, you wouldn't, because that wasn't his name then. It's likely that Tom Threepersons assumed that name to be sort of known or associated with the famous rodeo cowboy, who he was on at least one occasion known to have impersonated. At some point, he and the White family, Bill White would be Tom Threepersons' friend for most of his life, found themselves on the Canadian-American border. Sometime around 1907, Tom's father and Bill's father were killed by some cattle rustlers. They were, however, let go by the authorities, and once they were free, Tom and Bill White supposedly tracked them to a saloon, waited for them to leave, and ambushed them on the road and killed both of the cowboys. The whole problem with that timeline, as far as chronology goes, is Tom would have barely been 17, perhaps 16 years old, barely a man. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, because he was known to be an absolute crack shot with both pistol and rifle, but it does lend itself to a little bit of skepticism. Complicating matters further is the fact that there was a very similar story and incidents that actually happened to an individual named Frank Wheeler. So a lot of this is probably fake and completely unverifiable. So is the fact that Tom and Bill also worked for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Once again, if you did a name search, you wouldn't find them on their rolls, likely because that wasn't their names then. It is likely, however, that they were paid on a case-by-case basis for scouting and intelligence work by the Mounties and claimed to have gotten into several gunfights. The only thing that we can truly verify about Tom Threepersons' life began in 1916, when he was already 27 years old. As the stars in their courses would have it, he found himself in Douglas, Arizona, riding the rodeo circuit. At that time, General Jack Black Pershing was organizing troops for the punitive expedition and the hunt for Pancho Villa. It's interesting to note they called it a punitive expedition because Pancho Villa certainly wasn't punished. In fact, he was never actually seen during the whole course of that expedition. There are some unverified accounts of Tom being hand-selected by General George S. Patton for this expedition, but once again, no proof of that exists. I think it's the kind of a link because they both preferred the same pearl or ivory-handled Colt single-action Army revolver, one similar to what I have here on the table. However, Tom Threepersons did manage to find himself taken prisoner and ordered for execution by the Villanistas, except he escaped and trekked himself back across the desert for 3 weeks. That sort of ruggedness would serve Tom well over his next few decades as a law enforcement officer. After getting out of the punitive expedition, Tom actually enlisted full-time in the United States Army. But the only exciting thing that would happen to him during his whole course of enlistment is that he was kicked in the head by a horse. He required a steel plate in his head for the rest of his life, and it gave him off and on again debilitating headaches. It was one of the reasons why he was known to wear such a high-crowned cowboy hat. Tom was discharged from service in 1920, which was an amazing time to enter American law enforcement because of Prohibition, which had begun in 1919 with the Volstead Act. Tom became a policeman for the city of El Paso, one of the most violent places in North America at the time. He was stationed in southern El Paso in a district called Little Chihuahua. Little Chihuahua was no place to be if you were not good with a gun and extremely resourceful. In fact, the city of El Paso boasted 236 straight nights of shootouts between bootleggers and the police. While serving with El Paso, Tom was wounded 5 times and once even run over with a car by a bootlegger. He was, however, the bane of their existence, to the point where they actually offered a $10,000 reward for his capture. In one instance, he recovered $7,000 worth of liquor and arrested 16 bootleggers at the same time. This sort of resourcefulness made him a good fit for other law enforcement agencies at the time, including as a prohibition agent and a customs inspector. And like the lives of a lot of other lawmen/gunfighters at the time, they would work for multiple agencies throughout their career in law enforcement. Tom actually stated once that he didn't have any desire to be ranked up there with the likes of Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok. All he wanted to be was a good lawman and enforce the law fairly. Despite that want, he was in fact known as an absolutely shoot first and ask questions later sort of deputy, to the point where when a lot of bootleggers found out that Tom Threepersons was on their case, they turned themselves in willingly. One of them even joked that dealing with him in a gunfight is really like dealing with 3 persons, so he's aptly named. I find one of the more interesting aspects of Tom's life is the way he revolutionized law enforcement's carries of their revolvers. At the time, this would be standard kit for law enforcement. The revolver was lower on your leg, typically tied to it, of course, with the lanyard, and it worked modestly well on horses. The problem was we went from horses to horsepower. Law enforcement desperately needed a holster that would work in the tight confines of early automobiles as well as on the back of the horse. Tom Threepersons was a local legend in El Paso for not only his reputation as a lawman, but all of the gunfights that he survived through. Because of that, he partnered with S.D. Meyer Saddlery Company out of El Paso to create what history knows now, believe it or not still, as the Tom Threepersons rig. It would eventually be adopted by a lot of other law enforcement agencies at the time and their personnel, and it had some very, very advanced features for the time, some of the concepts still in use today with Kydex. The first thing is that the holster is very accessible. It's not designed to be worn low on the leg. It sits high up on the belt where you can easily grab it in a car, and you'll notice a lot more of the weapon system is sort of revealed. Remember, they were using single-action Colt pistols at the time, so as long as the hammer was in the forward position, you weren't in really any danger of inadvertently getting on the trigger and setting the revolver off. It gave you the ability to get a full firm purchase on the handle and clear the leather quickly. Some had and some did not have, of course, the strap to keep the gun in place. And you'll also notice that the hammer spur, the cocking spur, is also revealed. But one of the other interesting aspects of this holster is the way that it actually rode on the belt. Hopefully our camera will catch this. You can see this sort of angled tilt that the holster gave the wearer so that it would tilt forward on the hip, being easier to grab and much faster. Tom Threepersons was already sort of a legend with his quick draw and marksmanship capabilities, and this made him all the more capable and all the more dangerous. This system became so popular amongst local and federal law enforcement, it became known eventually as the FBI tilt. So as you can tell, I've of course put this on for a right-handed person or right-handed draw, and you can see the very, very clear forward cant with the butt handle. Completely innovative and out of the box thinking for its time. As we all know, Father Time is undefeated. As the years unfolded for Tom Threepersons, he went to New York and had a brain surgery to further improve his conditions. Once he recovered from that, he returned to the West, where he worked as the ranch manager for several different ranches around the country, including New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. Tom Threepersons died of pneumonia in Safford, Arizona in 1969. This incredible man left a legacy of the Old West that many of us can still enjoy today. El Paso Saddlery still makes versions for different types of revolvers of the Tom Threepersons rig. But his legacy goes far beyond a simple holster. He truly was the last of the great American gunfighters, fearless in a fight and completely convinced that good would triumph over evil. In an ironic twist of fate, while our videographer and producer, Matt McBrien, and I were discussing the life of Tom Threepersons, he revealed to me that he actually has extended family, also of Cherokee lineage, who lived around Veneta, Oklahoma. In fact, his great-great-grandfather, Ed Harlan, spent a few years in the Veneta prison for the murder of an individual named Lou Hunt, who he was having a property dispute with. Like a lot of family histories and stories, one of the kickers in this story is the fact that Matt was always told by his grandmother that his great-grandfather was only persecuted and found guilty because he was a Cherokee who had killed a white man. And Matt told me that that all holds water up until the fact that we find out that Lou Hunt was actually found at the bottom of a well. That crime occurred in 1905, and he was incarcerated until 1908 after numerous trials and mistrials. Proof positive that even then, just slightly after the turn of the century, the American West was still truly, truly wild.